It is truly fascinating how often the impossible becomes possible. The idea of mystery, horror, and conspiracy is one we can listen to for hours, but this video will look at survival and defying all odds. From plane crashes in the mountains to being lost in the ocean, here are 5 people who miraculously survived events that were deemed impossible. Number 5. The 1972 Andes plane crash. Starting with one people may be familiar with, the Uruguayan Flight 571 crash in the Andes Mountains will leave you with chills if you listen to this entire number. This disaster began with 45 passengers, 19 of which were members of a rugby team, alongside their family and friends. The pilot of the plane was inexperienced and mistakenly thought the plane had overflown and began to descend towards what he believed was an airport in Chile. The readings indicated he was still 60 to 90 kilometers east of the destination, but these were not noticed. The plane was in fact heading straight to the Andes Mountains. The pilot tried to gain altitude, but unfortunately could not in time. The plane collided with the mountain edge, causing wings and the tail to suffer. Sliding down a glacier at about 220 miles per hour or 350 kilometers per hour, the plane eventually came to a stop. 12 died immediately on impact, but the rest were currently alive and stranded in ice-cold conditions with injuries. Several more passed away in the first couple of weeks of being stranded due to injuries, and the remaining held out hope that they'd be found shortly. The survivors built temporary shelter from the wreckage and rationed the little food they had. Weeks continued to pass and the food had now run out. The survivors had to resort to cannibalism in order to stay alive. There's more though. The survivors faced 2 avalanches which killed further people, and hope was beginning to fade. Conditions were poor, with starvation and injuries still in place. 2 survivors, Nando and Roberto, decided to set out across the mountains on December 12th. They would spend the next 10 days with only materials from the aircraft wreckage, climbing slopes in the cold and trekking 53 kilometers or 33 miles before finding help. 2.5 months after the crash, 72 days, only 14 survivors were rescued. This is one of the worst plane crashes to ever be recorded and a tragedy that we cannot forget. Number 4. Stephen Callahan. This story takes place in the deep ocean. Stephen endured a shocking 76 days on his own, floating in the ocean with virtually nothing, but what he had is a big factor in how he survived. Stephen's self-made sailboat got struck by something unknown in the water during a storm, and his boat started to sink. Luckily, Stephen was able to escape with a life raft. After several trips of swimming below and back to the raft in the middle of a storm, Stephen was able to retrieve essentials such as his sleeping bag, a first aid kit, food navigation charts, a short spear gun, flares, a torch, 3 solar stills for producing drinking water, and possibly the best of all, a copy of Sea Survival, a manual that may well have saved him. The storm had calmed, but Stephen's raft drifted away from the sunken boat with no idea of where he would end up. As he neared the end of his food supply, Stephen was able to catch fish and birds while collecting rainwater, which enabled him to drink about a pint a day. He spotted 9 ships during his 76 days alone at sea, but it wasn't until April 20th, 1982, where he spotted lights on an island and was later rescued by some fishermen. Stephen faced sharks, raft punctures, and deterioration both physically and mentally during his time at sea. He still enjoys sailing and went on to write a book about his experience. Number 3. Annette Herfkens. Annette was not only the sole survivor of a plane crash, but she spent 8 days alone in the jungle where the plane crashed before being rescued. Annette and her fiancé boarded a plane taking them from Ho Chi Minh City to the Vietnamese coast for a break. 40 minutes into the flight, the plane started to drop. Panic quickly spread through the plane of 25 passengers, and the plane dropped again before everything went black for Annette. Annette woke up to the sound of the jungle with the realization she had suffered big injuries. She had 12 cracked bones in her hip and knee alone. Her jaw was hanging and one lung had collapsed. Annette was able to crawl away from the wreckage and begin her 8 days in the forest. Slow, over the hours, days, survivors around her went silent, but still Annette was alive and had to start thinking about staying that way. She tactically used sponge from the aeroplane wing to collect water, which kept her hydrated, but the process of dragging her broken body and putting all weight on her elbows was not easy. She would go on to need a skin graft for her elbows, but this thinking and action in the forest kept her alive. Annette was eventually rescued and went on to recover and write a book about her experience. She was the only survivor of the plane crash, and taking flights are still hard for her almost 30 years on. Number 2. Matt Dyer. A group exploring Canada's mountains stumbled across a polar bear while setting up their tents for bed one evening. The group had attempted to scare the polar bear away, who was located further downstream, but the bear would not budge. Thinking danger was not a big issue, the group cooked and ate dinner, while still the bear did not move away. The campsite had been rigged with an electric fence to deter bears in close proximity, and the guide was confident this would be enough to stop a polar bear. The evening carried on, and eventually Matt and his team went to bed. Matt had spent all night thinking about the polar bear, but the confidence around him had been reassuring. A few hours into sleep, Matt awoke to go to the toilet. He stepped out the tent and looked at where the polar bear last was. The bear was gone, and this brought great joy to Matt. At 2:30 a.m, movement outside the tent awoke Matt once again, and to his shock, the shadow of a polar bear lunging for his tent caused him to scream. The creature crashed through the tent and began clawing at Matt. Lying defenseless, the bear's teeth reached for Matt's face, and now Matt was in the jaws of a polar bear, frightened as anyone would be. The bear began to run with Matt's head locked between its sharp teeth, dragging his helpless body across the floor. The cracking of bones could be felt where the bear was biting his skull and neck. Chaos suddenly ended as one of the guides shot a flare up and the bear dropped Matt, scurrying away. The bear was still close, but luckily this was the end of the attack. Matt then spent 8 hours with the group waiting for a helicopter, with his companions taking guard as the bear had destroyed the electric fence. Matt suffered a cracked jaw, several cracked vertebrae, a hole clean through his hand from the bite, gashes to his skull and neck, and a collapsed lung, in addition to multiple wounds from the attack in 2013. Number 1. Beck Weathers. This is by far one of the most shocking on this list. Mount Everest is the highest mountain in the world. Standing at 8,850 metres or over 29,000 feet, the mountain attracts adrenaline junkies who attempt to climb it despite high winds, below freezing temperatures and low oxygen. On May the 10th, 1996, Beck Weathers set off with his team at the base of Mount Everest, with Rob Hall leading the expedition. Rob had already summited Everest 5 times, so was experienced with the mountain to say the least. Beck had undergone surgery to correct his eyesight not long before the scheduled climb, and the altitude had damaged Beck's eyesight, leaving him close to blind once darkness arrived. Once leader, Rob, had discovered this, he stopped Beck from climbing further. While Beck waited for the rest of the team to continue to the top and return back down, picking him up on the way, Beck had offers from multiple groups climbing down, but insisted he'd wait for Rob. Little did he know, Rob would unfortunately never return. One teammate became weak, and Rob ended up waiting with the teammate, which led to death due to temperatures continuing to drop. The remainder of the team met Beck on the way down, and they set up tents for the night. A storm was beginning to kick in, which caused visibility to perish, and this led to Beck being blown over the snow, in addition to high winds. The team were rescued later that night, but upon looking at Beck, the rescuer deemed Beck was past being saved and left him. On Mount Everest, people are often left if they are dying, given conditions are too harsh for helicopter rescues or for survivors to successfully descend with a victim too. Having been left to die on Everest, this is not the end of the story for Beck. There's more. In the morning, a doctor was sent up to try and see if Beck could be saved and rescued one more time. The doctor deemed Beck as being beyond savable, and Beck was left a second time. Fast forward to later that day at 4 PM, and Beck miraculously wakes up. He managed to descend back down, leaving his teammates shocked upon arrival. Beck had beaten all odds and survived the climb. Beck's wife had already been informed of his death after the doctor had abandoned him, so his death was common knowledge before 4 PM. Beck had severe frostbite, and his right arm, the fingers on his left hand, parts of his feet, and his nose were amputated. Despite being left for dead twice, Beck had survived. Did you enjoy this video? If you did, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. More videos will be coming soon.